We are now looking at section 2.8, Graphing Linear Inequalities. Before we start, I want you to think about how would you explain in your own words to graph the equation 2x minus 3y equals negative 18. The big thing here is it uses the word explain, and we have to get used to writing in complete sentences. Okay, so if you were to explain this, this would be a good example. First, you would need to solve for y to put the equation in slope-intercept form. Once you have y equals 2/3 x plus 6, you take the y-intercept of 6 and graph that on the y-axis. Knowing that the slope is 2/3, you start at the point 0, 6, which was the y-intercept, and go up to right 3, which will be your next point. From that new point, go up 2 to the right 3, go up 2 and right 3 again and plot that point. It's always nice to have 3 points so that the line is nice and straight and accurate. Once you have those 3 points, draw a nice straight line through them and you have the graph of that equation. Lastly, check to make sure that your line makes sense. Plug in some points on the line to check. Okay, now that would be a good explanation of how you would graph the equation. Just make sure that when you're explaining, you write in a full sentence and remember that you want it to be so that somebody who walked into the room and didn't know what we were doing would be able to figure out what you're talking about. Okay, so that would be a good explanation. Moving on. Which ordered pair is a solution of 5x minus 2y is less than or equal to 6? Well, let's take the point 0, negative 3. If I plug that in, 5 times 0 is 0, and then negative 2 times negative 3 is 6. So for letter A, I would have 0 plus 6 is less than or equal to 6. Is that true? Is 6 less than or equal to 6? That actually is the correct answer because of the equal sign. So A would be the correct answer. Okay? If I tried B, 5 times 5 is 25, minus 2 times 5 is 10, 25 minus 10 is 15, 15 is not less than or equal to 6. What about the point 1, negative 2? 5 times 1 is 5. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. 5 plus 4 is 9. 9 is also not less than or equal to 6. And then if we plug in the point 3, 3, 5 times 3 is 15. Minus 2 times 3 is 6. 15 minus 6 is 9 again. 9 is not less than or equal to 6. So B, C, and D do not work. The correct answer is letter A. Now let's graph the inequality. X is less than or equal to 5 on the coordinate plane. Think back to when we graphed x equals 5. Okay? X equals a constant is a vertical line. So I would start by graphing a point at x equals 5. So I would start here. And then I know that this is supposed to be a vertical line. And you also have to look, when you're doing inequalities, you have to look at the inequality symbol. This has an equal sign, so that means that my line is going to be solid. Okay? If there's an equal sign, the line is solid. And you should have arrows on both ends of that line also because that does go on forever. Okay? Now, the thing about inequalities, we're not done graphing just by graphing the line. The question asks, or the inequality says, when is x less than or equal to 5? Well, I took care of the equals by drawing the solid line, but now when does x get smaller? Think about this x-axis, okay? When is x getting smaller? Well, if you think about at x equals 5, the x is getting smaller to the left. So what I would have to do then is shade in this whole side of that line, because x is going to be less than 5 on this side of that line. Okay, so for inequalities, we should be doing some shading. Now let's graph y is less than 2x plus 3 on the coordinate plane. Think back to y equals mx plus b. Same thing. First we start, when we are graphing, we have to start with the y-intercept. And for this inequality, our y-intercept is 3. Okay, mx plus b, the b is positive 3. So I would start by graphing that on the y-axis, because the y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, now my slope for this inequality is positive 2. It's the number in front of the x. So the slope is 2. Think of it as a fraction, 2 over 1. So then you have a rise and a run. So from this point, I'm going to go up 2, right 1. And we'll do that as many times as we need to so that I have a nice straight line. But now if you look at this inequality, you're going to have a dashed line because there's no equal sign on that less than symbol. So for this line, we need to make sure that we draw in a dashed line. Okay? So there's my line. Now I need to decide, where am I going to shade? Okay? Now, to decide what side you're going to shade on, pick a point. Now for me, I like to use the point 0, 0 whenever possible. The thing about picking a point is it cannot be a point on the line. Now if you look, the point 0, 0 is not on that dashed line. So I'm going to use the point 0, 0, and I'm going to plug it back into this inequality. Okay, so if I plug in 0, 0, I would have 0 is less than 2 times 0 plus 3. That would give me 0 is less than 0 plus 3. 0 is less than 3. Is that true? Okay, think to yourself, is 0 less than 3? Yes, it is. That means that this point, 0, 0, works for this inequality. And we always shade the things that work. So that means that everywhere on this side of the dashed line is a possible answer. So I'm going to shade this whole side of the dashed line. And that is graphing that inequality. Okay? Just remember, when you plug in a point, if it works, that's the side you shade. If it doesn't work, then you would shade the other side. And if you want to check to see if you're right, you can always pick another point. I can pick any point inside this shaded region, and it should work for this inequality. Okay, so don't be afraid to pick other points if you're not sure. Not really sure what that is. Next one. Graph 3x minus 4y is greater than 12. First thing we need to do is get this into slope-intercept form. So I would subtract 3x from both sides. That leaves me with negative 4y is greater than negative 3x. Remember, we always put the x first, and then the 12 is positive, so it would be plus 12. Now we need to divide everything by negative 4. And think about this. This is an inequality, and we divided by a negative. So remember, we also have to flip that inequality symbol. When you multiply or divide by a negative in an inequality, you have to flip the symbol. Notice two negatives make a positive 3/4, and then a positive over a negative gives us minus, and 12 divided by 4 is 3. So to start this one, my y-intercept is negative 3, okay? Negative 3 here. So I'm going to go over to the y-axis, put a dot at negative 3. There's my point. Now my slope is 3/4. So from my y-intercept, I'm going to go up 3, right 4. And I'll do that again. Up 3, right 4. And then I have to think about what kind of a line this is. Again, this one is going to be dashed because there's no equal sign on this inequality symbol. Okay, so this again needs to be a dashed line through those points. Okay, and then remember the next step was to ask yourself, what point should you plug in to see what side to shade? Again, I would use the point 0, 0 because it's not on this line. So if I plug 0, 0 in up here, think about this whole side. I would always go back to the original inequality, especially for this one. It's going to be pretty easy. 3 times 0 is 0, and then 4 times 0 is 0. So this side is going to give me 0. And then we've got greater than 12. Is 0 greater than 12? No, it's not. That means that this point 0, 0 does not satisfy the inequality, so I have to shade the other side. That means that every point over on this side where I shaded should satisfy the inequality. And that concludes section 2.8.